At 3:07 in the morning on August 21, 1942, Colonel Kiyonao Ichiki crouched behind the splintered trunk of a fallen palm tree on the eastern bank of Alligator Creek, his eyes fixed on the pale strip of sand that stretched 50 yards across the dark, slow-moving water toward the American lines. The jungle behind him was silent in the way only trained soldiers can make it silent. 817 men of the Imperial Japanese Army's elite 28th Infantry Regiment lay motionless among the palms and tall kunai grass, bayonets fixed, rifles held tight against their chests. They believed this night would end the American presence on Guadalcanal. They believed Henderson Field would be back in Japanese hands by dawn. Across the creek, Private Al Schmid fed a fresh ammunition belt into the receiver of his water-cooled Browning machine gun, the steel links rattling softly as he guided them into place. The gun sat low behind sandbags on the western bank, its barrel shrouded in a water jacket designed for one purpose: to fire without stopping. Nearby, a 37mm anti-tank gun sat angled toward the sandbar, its breech closed on a canister round packed with 122 steel balls. When fired, it would turn open ground into a storm of metal. Between Ichiki and Schmid lay 50 yards of exposed sand that would soon decide the fate of an entire regiment. 6 weeks earlier, Ichiki had received clear, unambiguous orders from General Harakichi Hyakutake at Rabaul. Land east of the American perimeter. Wait for the rest of the regiment. Attack with full strength. The instructions reflected years of Japanese doctrine refined in China. Methodical buildup followed by overwhelming night assault. But Ichiki had never been a patient officer. On August 19th, when his advance patrol blundered into a Marine reconnaissance team and the element of surprise was lost, he decided waiting was no longer an option. He would attack immediately with what he had. Spirit would make up the difference. This was not the first time Ichiki had made such a choice. 5 years earlier, at the Marco Polo Bridge outside Beijing, he had helped ignite a war by choosing retaliation over restraint. When negotiations were still possible, he pushed for action. Artillery followed. China burned. The lesson he carried forward was simple and dangerous. Strike first, strike hard, and hesitation becomes weakness. At Midway, only 3 months before Guadalcanal, that philosophy had been denied him. His regiment had boarded transports loaded for invasion, trained and ready, only to be turned back after Japan's carrier fleet was destroyed. The men had returned to Japan without firing a shot, angry, frustrated, desperate to prove themselves. Guadalcanal offered redemption. When American Marines landed on August 7th and seized the unfinished airstrip, Japanese intelligence dismissed it as a minor incursion. 2,000 or 3,000 men at most. A reconnaissance force. Something to be crushed quickly before it became a problem. Henderson Field, though unfinished, was a strategic dagger pointed at Japanese shipping lanes. Every day it remained in American hands increased the cost of removing them. Speed mattered. The plan was sound. Ichiki's detachment would land first, establish a foothold, and wait for the rest of the regiment. Then they would strike at night with more than 2,000 men. But when Ichiki came ashore at Taivu Point in the early hours of August 19th, everything felt wrong to him. The jungle was quiet. The Americans were closer than expected. Delay, he believed, would only give them time to dig in. By dawn, his men were moving west. Lightly equipped, carrying only 3 days of rations, they advanced through thick jungle toward Alligator Creek. When his patrol was wiped out and documents fell into Marine hands, Ichiki convinced himself that surprise was already lost. Waiting weeks for reinforcements, he reasoned, would allow the Americans to fortify Henderson Field into an impregnable fortress. His intelligence still insisted the enemy was weak. Japanese night attack doctrine had shattered stronger forces before. Courage would bridge the gap. What Ichiki did not know was that more than 11,000 Marines were dug in around the airfield. They had artillery. They had anti-tank guns loaded with canister. They had studied Japanese tactics and built their defenses specifically to counter them. The Americans were not improvising. They were waiting. The Marines had been left exposed after the disaster at Savo Island forced the Navy to withdraw early, taking much-needed supplies with it. General Alexander van de Grift knew his division was isolated. 17 days of rations. Limited ammunition. But they had the airfield, and around it they built a perimeter that curved along rivers, ridges, and jungle approaches. On the eastern flank, at Alligator Creek, Lieutenant Colonel Edwin Pollock positioned his men carefully. Machine guns were sighted to overlap fields of fire. The 37mm guns were aimed directly at the sandbar. Artillery batteries registered targets in advance. If the Japanese came, they would come into prepared killing zones. On the evening of August 20th, Sergeant Major Jacob Vuza crawled into the Marine lines, bleeding and barely alive. Captured by Japanese scouts, stabbed repeatedly and left for dead, he had dragged himself through miles of jungle to deliver a warning. Hundreds of Japanese soldiers were moving toward Alligator Creek. An attack was coming that night. The Marines listened. They prepared. At 1:30 in the morning, a green flare arced into the sky, bathing the sandbar in ghostly light. Ichiki's first wave rose from concealment and charged, shouting as they ran, bayonets flashing. They expected shock to carry them forward. Instead, the night exploded. The 37mm guns fired first. Canister rounds turned the sandbar into a cone of flying steel. Machine guns followed, water-cooled barrels roaring as they cut through the charging figures. Rifle fire cracked in disciplined volleys. Men fell by the dozens. The first assault collapsed in minutes, bodies piling on sand and floating in the shallows. Ichiki ordered another attack. Then another. Each time, more men died. American artillery joined in, shells slamming into Japanese assembly areas east of the creek. By dawn, the water ran red. Hundreds of Japanese soldiers lay dead. The night attack doctrine that had terrorized Asia shattered against American firepower and preparation. At sunrise, the Marines counterattacked. Tanks rolled forward across the sandbar, infantry close behind. Artillery and aircraft joined in. Japanese survivors fought desperately, refusing to surrender. By mid-afternoon, the last pockets of resistance were wiped out. Of nearly 900 men, only 15 were captured alive. Colonel Ichiki was dead. His regiment was gone. The Battle of Tenaru was over, but its meaning echoed far beyond one sandbar. For the first time, Japanese forces had been decisively defeated in ground combat. The myth of invincibility cracked. American combined arms doctrine, infantry, artillery, armor, and air power working together, had proven its worth. Henderson Field remained in American hands. The Cactus Air Force grew stronger. Japanese attempts to retake the island would fail again and again at terrible cost. Ichiki had been told to wait. He did not. 800 of his men paid for that decision in one night. On Guadalcanal, courage met preparation, and preparation won.